Morning, everyone. This is really me. It's Fran Lewis, MJ Network. Today's show is dedicated to the memory of my sister, Marcia Joyce, who the station is named after. Because tomorrow is the day we say prayers for everyone, and that's the hardest one. But this is going to be great because Dr. George Cavuto is here, and we're going to talk about 10 reading strategies that I have posted everywhere so people actually learn something. Opening statement: reading is not a condition you don't have or don't have it. It's a complex learning process that develops over time. We treat it like a diagnosis, we misunderstand the problem from the start. That is really important. Now, you're starting with the core problem. I actually found the definition. A core problem is reading comprehension is the inability to construct meaning from text despite potentially having adequate decoding skills. I'm going to let you expand on that one now
Sure,
that I can find it.
sure. Um, what in terms of the core problem, friend, I'm going to be a little broader than you. You did say comprehension, and of course, that's always a core problem. When we say a person has reading problems, I doubt we could leave reading comprehension out. But in terms of one of the things, one of the differentiations I wanted to make this morning, it's that the one of the core problems that we've had in education over the past, at least 3 decades,
Mm.
we were treating reading problems as something, a condition that uh, a child, a youngster has or doesn't have. Instead of instead of treating it like a condition or a medical condition, as it were, because as you know, we use all these quasi medical terms. Um, we really should start looking more, in my opinion, as a problem with the process, because reading is a learnable process. And if we come up with a quasi medical label for the youngster that explains away the process and simply says, well, he's got this, he's got that, meaning he's got uh, dyslexia, he's got central auditory processing difficulty. These kinds of quasi medical definitions or labels, I should say, actually, they're labels. Um, they obfuscate the problem. They obfuscate the problem, and more importantly, they make the child feel like there's something wrong with him. And once you think there's something wrong with you, there is something wrong with you. I think we
Mm.
call that the self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's something I think we really should key into today. And are we labeling too much? And just one last statistic, and I'm sure you'll jump in, and I know you will because you always do your incredible research. But a very quick statistic: in 1985, we had 750,000 children in this country labeled learning disabled. 785,000. In 2015, going into 2016, we have close to 15 million. That's, in my opinion, ridiculous. That's absolutely absurd that we're labeling 15 million children learning disabled. And my last comment before I quiet down a little bit, of those 15 million, 90%, 90 to 99% of them have as their major, the ones who are labeled learning disabled, I should say, have as their major difficulty reading and or writing. So instead of saying that that's their major problem, reading or writing, we give them the dyslexic label or the central auditory processing difficulty label, or we start getting involved with things like, well, it's basically neurologic when we've never had any definitive proof that there's a neurological cause for this, for some of these labels that I just articulated. So it basically, in a few words, I think we are over labeling, and that over labeling is doing youngsters, and this is the most important thing, it's doing them a disservice.
You know what's really sad is that people don't really understand that sometimes it's not a learning disorder. Sometimes it's just that I haven't been taught.
Yeah.
And from what I gather from my nieces are pretty smart.
Mhm.
I mean, Grace Marie is in second grade reading on fourth, and I was sad because I missed Passover for whatever reason, and Henley Rose was thrilled because I gave sent her 10 novels. She's in third grade reading on sixth grade, so she didn't know what she was like. Oh my God, this is great because they're readers. I said, well, somebody's got to take after me.
There you
But
go.
a lot of kids don't read and they get discouraged right away. And I said, doesn't matter whether you read a novel or a newspaper, as long as you read something and get something out of it, even if you read 15, 20 minutes a day.
Right.
And
Well,
I know that my nieces are required in school, but I know that they you don't even have to ask them to read. So the next topic is interesting. The key distinction in reading is diagnosis, what is wrong. A reading's essential distinction changes everything. The distinction in reading between comprehension, between literal understanding and inferential understanding, reading between the lines, while while literal reading requires identifying stated details, inferential reading requires synthesizing context, background knowledge, and implicit cues to determine the meaning for allowing higher evaluation and analysis. And you'll be amazed how many teachers can't do that.
yeah, yeah. The this is I think a critical
Yeah.
concept, right? Again, I started off and you reiterated this. Instead of what is wrong with this child, we have to ask what is happening while the child's reading. Again, are there some children with labels, um, specifically some of the perhaps uh, the physically disabled children who have really severe problems, who they're in the under the special umbrella as well.
Mm.
But clearly, they have far greater problems than just reading, and they may quite honestly not have a reading problem at all. But I'm talking about the elderly children. Okay, so when we label a child learning disabled, we're saying that he has a disability in learning, and we give it a name. There's always a label. In fact, the government requires that we give it a label. 1942, public law. And once we give the youngster a label, of course, then we have to make an IEP. Yes, and the
Mhm.
IEP, what it ends up doing is it ends up, in my view, contributing to the problem, because once we write on his IEP or her IEP, well, this youngster has a decoding problem. He's got dyslexia, and so he can read. So what we're going to do is have everything read to him. That's that's on many IEPs throughout this country. Everything can be read to the youngster because he can't possibly do it himself because he has dyslexia. Okay. So, and I'm going to quote Jim Trelease, who said that's the Read Aloud Handbook, the famous Jim Trelease. No one ever got good at reading by not reading. So by putting on the youngster's IEP that everything can be read to him because he's got this disability, we are in fact, in my view, contributing to the problem. In fact, we're exacerbating the problem. What should we do instead? Very
Mm.
simple, Fran. This is not that difficult. We should try to figure out why he's not able to decode words, why he's having difficulty uh, decoding words. So what was breaking down? And
Mm.
we can't say things, in my view, like, well, he's got an auditory processing difficulty. Come on, that's just that's uh, educational jargon. What we have to do is we have to watch him read and see where the process is breaking down. Now, if we see it's dyslexia, obviously it's going to be breaking down and decoding. So if his problem is in decoding, well, let's look at why. And when I watch, and I've had
Mm.
the luxury of actually evaluating over 4,000 children throughout my career, and working with those same children. Uh, Oftentimes, it's
Mm.
the methodology that's being used. is just they're just not grabbing that. I see. In fact, one of the most popular, and a lot of your audience probably are going to take umbrage at this statement, but the most popular reading program in the United States right now, according to my reading of statistics, is the Wilson Reading Program. And as you probably know, the Wilson Reading Program involves children initially tapping out words. They tap out words. And there's a word for that in education. We call that ecologically invalid. Who taps out words? Have you ever seen even a, a second, third, fourth grader who's a good reader tapping out words? It's
Mhm.
absolutely ridiculous. However, the Wilson people, and it's kind of an offshoot of Orton Gillingham, uh, except there's the tapping involved. I have several teachers who have worked in my office with me, and they tell me, Cavuto, this Wilson reading program is so hard. I'm kind of dreading the Wilson person coming in to watch me because I'm
Uh-huh.
expected to do it. I don't I can't I'm not sure what you tap on this one or this one. And if in my view it's really quite simple. If the teacher who has a master's degree, and in my office they have to have a master's degree in reading, can't figure out when to tap and how to tap, the program should be put in the circular file. So, what can we do instead? Well, how about we look and see how is this youngster being taught the tapping? Well, that might not be working. Maybe that
Yeah,
didn't
I
work.
know.
So perhaps instead of tapping, we should look and say, are they using a now? Well, are they using uh, a phonetic uh, process where they're sounding out every letter and every word? That never works. That's strict uh, since strict phonics with every letter making a sound, and unfortunately that might work. I'm sorry, that does work in Spanish and Italian very well because both of them are totally phonetically consistent. In English, it does not work. It simply does not work. 60% of the words are found sound audible, 40% are not. So maybe we should do something like, a fellow named Jerry Glass at Adelphi University a while ago had this idea. Let's teach chunks. Let's teach chunks like chunk, uh, all. So instead of k at, it becomes k at. Instead of k r, instead of k t, carpet, it was k r pet. Fran, simply going to a cluster based approach to decoding, I have found incredibly, uh, it's just so incredibly easier for the youngster to put the sounds together. I have tried this with teachers, and I have had my graduate students at the college university try to integrate sounds letter by letter. Many of them
Yeah.
can't do it. It's not easy to do it. Uh, and if we had more time, we could play, and I'd have you do a few of them. But uh, trust me, if you did it with youngsters, I'm sure you've done it in your background. Uh, that's one of the things I would change. If
That's
youngsters having difficulty breaking the code, let's see why, and let's not blame the child. Let's see
yeah.
why the process is breaking down, and could it be the methodology that's being right now? The big thing is the science of reading. You've heard science of reading, of course. I'm still trying to figure out what it is, because to me it looks nothing more than a little bit of this, and a little bit of that. Uh, but in the science of reading, one thing that concerns me is that recently, one of the states that had adopted the science of reading has said we are going to outlaw the three language queuing systems. Well, I find that not only absurd, I can't believe it. It's almost laughable. There is not a linguist in the world today who would argue that there are not three language queuing systems that help us figure out words: graphophonic, semantic, syntactic. This is not. a Wilson program, an Owen Gillingham program, a whole language program. This is how reading works. Reading works by flexibly using graphophonic, which we simply call phonics, semantic, which are the meaning cues, and
Hmm.
syntactic. How could you possibly think of outlawing them? It's absolutely ridiculous. The three language cueing systems are not a methodology. They're how reading works. Okay, so we should teach teachers, and we should be emphasizing how to flexibly use the three language cueing systems, and moreover, we should be teaching them how's the best way to teach that phonic program, that phonic aspect. Is that all of reading? Of course not. Semantics is critically important. So
Yeah.
in my view, simply we have
Oh no, my pages just dropped.
I had to flexibly use the three language queuing systems. There's no mystery there, really.
You know what the saddest part is? Is that when I go into a store or something and I see a child reading and they say, I hate reading, and it's too hard for me. So, sometimes I actually butt in and they'll say, what's hard for you? I can't read all the words. It's hard. I said, you're not expected to read everything perfectly, but you're just expected to try. I said, reading is power. And just think about all the things that you're going to learn that nobody could stop you from learning if you read. And then they looked at me. I said, well, what do you like to read? Baseball. What? I said, doesn't matter what you read. You could read about basketball. I mean, my reading groups, my fifth graders thought I was a little crazy. And I used to say to them, what do you want to read on Wednesday? What's the third day? What do you want to read about? We want to read about a rap singer. We want to read the. Okay, I learned an awful lot, but it doesn't mean anything. Now, this
Right.
is the most important thing. Teachers don't always recognize what good readers actually do. And they recognize words accurately, automatically, connect them to meaning, which is important. Stay engaged in the text. Reading is an active transaction, continuous process, not a static ability. And I'm realizing that when I listen to some kids read, they read so fast, but they have no idea what they're hearing.
Yeah.
They may read fluently, but they don't hear the words. And I try to explain to them, you're reading beautifully. Well, how come I can't remember? Because you're so concerned about getting it done fast that you're not listening to what you are. So I'll say to them, read it to yourself, read it out loud, read it to yourself. What did you read? So, how do you correct that? What readers actually do, good readers actually do. And how does a teacher really know what a good reader is? Because then we're going to come to what happens when they struggle, what reading breaks down. That's an
Yeah.
important topic.
Very, very important question, friend. I'm gonna, I'm gonna, I'm gonna allude to one of my favorite books in the teaching of reading. It's a
Mm.
book that was written in 1903 by Edmund Burke Huey, called "The Psychology and Pedagogy of Reading." And I know me and you, the two of us, have discussed that book. And in that book, one of the things Edmund Burke, by the
Yeah.
way, he starts that book off by saying this. Um, uh, to let's see, to analyze what we do when we read would be the acme of a science
Mhm.
achievement, because it would be to explain the most intricate workings of the human mind. And and then he spends another 200 pages discussing reading. And one of the things he talks about is something that was at the time in the late 1800s, early 1900s, called the non-oral hypothesis. I'm pretty sure you haven't heard of that because it's not too popular. But the non-oral hypothesis was one of the experts in reading at the time said, we're having children do too much oral reading in schools. And they're, because they're doing so much oral reading in schools, they're getting the idea in first, second, third grade that reading is all about sounding good, to being,
Mhm.
and I don't love this word too much, fluent. The child should be a fluent reader. Well, Fran, Edmund Burke goes on to explain that oral reading, to a certain extent, is a performance display. What we're doing is we're performing for other kids. Now, before I get misconstrued here, There is no doubt that there's some
Hmm.
value to oral reading. Number one, poems should be read out loud. They're meant to be read out loud. Yes, poetry should be read out loud. Plays are meant to be read out loud. They should not be read silently. However, if we convince youngsters in first and second grade, all right, even in kindergarten, but K 1 and 2, that reading is all about being fluent, getting all the words right. If that happens in my classroom, I'm going to say, beautiful reading, Joey. Beautiful reading, Joe. No, no, no. If they read something out loud, and I'm not in favor of the mm,
Hmm.
total non-oral hypothesis, but the idea is what happens is, I think we both know this. If the youngster reads something out loud and he finishes reading, he was fluent, he didn't make any miscues, and what
Yeah.
does the teacher say? The teacher says, "Beautiful reading, Joey." Now, should the teacher say that? In my view, no, no, no. What the teacher should say is, "Joey, you know what? Tell me about what you just read. You read two paragraphs. Tell me about it. Tell me about it." Well, yeah, it was about this baseball game, and the
Hmm.
baseball game was tied. But then this guy hit a home run, and after he hit the home run, the crowds cheered. They're really happy. Then the teachers say, "Beautiful reading, Joey." Friend, do you see the differentiation? In the former case, the teacher's applauding the fluency and the procedural display. In the second case, the teacher is applauding what she should be applauding, which is the comprehension. In other words, children children should learn that good reading and proficient reading is only good when you can follow it up with comprehension. If there's no comprehension there, all you did was you
Yeah.
performed. So that's a biggie. That's really that's really a biggie. And if I may just add one more thing, uh, if teachers would learn, but we don't give teachers enough coursework in reading, in my opinion. But if they would learn how to analyze oral reading miscues, okay, uh, miscue analysis according to Ken
Yeah.
Goodman. But if we taught teachers how to do what's called mental miscue analysis, instead of filling out those charts and going crazy doing that, you do it in your head. It's not hard. Did First thing you ask, did the miscue make sense? Did it make sense? Was it semantically acceptable, semantically unacceptable? Second thing you ask, well, if it wasn't, if it did make sense, did the youngster try to self-correct, which we call self-monitoring? Third thing we ask is, okay, was it high or low graphophonic? Meaning, did it look like the text word or not? Which might indicate a breakdown at the phonic level. By the way, if the miscue happened to be semantically correct,
Yeah.
meaning you read house for home, in my view, there's one important thing the teacher should do, and that is nothing. That miscue should remain uncorrected. Why? Because I want the youngster to read House for Home the rest of his life? Of course not. But he's reading House for Home because he he didn't make the miscue because he couldn't decode that word. He made that kind of miscue because his brain, is ahead of his eyes. Huh? He was thinking and processing meaning as he's reading, just as we do all the time in life. In fact, I have an article I really have to finish one of these days, but if I may, we poo-poo guessing in school. And in my view, guessing, not just in my view, a great book just came out by Jeff Hawkins. Two things Two things are critically important in life: guessing, which let's not call it guessing. Let's call it hypothesis testing. That's more scientific, right? Hypothesis testing and background knowledge. If a youngster has good background knowledge, adequate background knowledge, which we call schemata, and as he reads, he's actually, his brain is ahead of his eyes, that he's making good guesses as to what the next word should be. Friend, those are good miscues, and if the teacher constantly corrects those, he's going to convince the student that reading's all about fluency and sounding good and being exact with every word And I'm not suggesting at all they should be sloppy readers, but I'm suggesting the best readers make good miscues, miscues that make sense. I had a parent that said to me, Dr.
Yeah.
Cavuto, I want my child to come to your center. He's good. He's a great reader. He's great. He's great. He's fluent. He reads beautifully. And the only thing is, he sometimes he misses a word. But when he misses the word, what he puts in there makes sense. I said, what kind of grades does he get? Well, he's an straight A student. Pardon me, straight A student. I said, so why do you want to bring him to my center? Well, because he makes these. He's a little concerned because he reads some words wrong here and there. So I said, well, I have a solution. I can save you a lot of money and not bring him to me to any other reading center or reading tutor. So you could do it over the phone. Sure, let him read silently. Because if you let him read silently, you're not going to hear those miscues. And not only you're not going to hear those miscues, but if they're semantically acceptable, they don't matter anyway. And just let him read silently, and he's going to be happier. And you're going to say that you have a youngster who really does have a problem that you maybe, in fact, teachers maybe, of course, teachers are not. I don't know of a teacher who's ill intentioned, but sometimes they're just not well informed about the very specifics of reading. So, uh, very important we look at what's happening as the youngster's reading. And when we talk about labels, youngsters with labels,
Yeah,
of
that's next. Yeah. But
the
you know what
process
I
of
think?
breaking down.
But after you answered that, we sort of answered the key areas where reading breaks down in that discussion just now. But this is something that I don't like, and it gets me upset. And I do have my pages here. I can't stand when people label kids,
Yeah,
and labels can be self-fulfilling. Students begin to believe what's wrong with me, and I've heard teachers till this day, as they, walking and listening, well, he's not too bright, he can't do that. Or I don't think that he should read aloud because he's holding the class up. And that drives me and of course I'm gonna answer. I'm gonna answer. Because when you label someone as a poor reader, they're not gonna read anymore. And that's what gets me even more upset because I have nephews that read. I mean, and I have nephews that don't read, and they don't feel that if you criticize a child when they're reading too much, they're not going to read.
right.
And I notice that a lot of teachers that I speak with that teach special ed don't get that, and I'll tell them you give them a chance to get there, even if it's wrong. It doesn't matter. You need to tell them that it's okay to try, and they don't. And some of them follow this canned program. You have to follow this to have, and if something is wrong, they can't change. They can't change. They have to follow the science of reading, which I don't particularly like. So, how do you correct labels? And then we're going to get on to a very important topic: effective domain.
Yeah. Well, to answer your question, how do we uh, if I may just
Yeah,
reword it a tiny bit, how do we stop all of this labeling that we're doing? Obviously, we're doing too much labeling. If we went from
yeah,
75,000, 750,000 to almost 15 million, it can't be something in the drinking water, right? So it has to be we are over labeling youngsters. And in my view, it's not all that difficult to solve that problem. Number one, we have to we have to increase the number of reading specialists who are working in schools. Again, we have a lot of special education teachers working in schools, and I'm sure many of them are excellent teachers. But what I know for a fact, because I've done a lot of research on this, is that most of them do not have more than two courses in reading undergrad, and sometimes they'll take one or two in at the graduate level, but
Mhm.
three courses or four courses does not make a reading specialist. Does not make a reading specialist. At the master's degree program that I developed. Well, actually, I amended the one that was in place, and that we were applauded by or given a commendation by the New York State Department of Education to be a model program. We had a 36 credit master's degree program, Fran, uh, in 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 reading, and of the 36 credits, there were 33 required. So we had one elective, and the college wasn't crazy about that change, but we were turning out teachers who had 33 graduate credits in reading, and I was getting calls left and right by school districts. They would say to me, Cavuto, send us one of your stars. Send us one of the people who you and your staff and your wonderful staff of adjunct professors have trained, because we have found they really know what they're doing. So again, in two sentences, Fran, to reduce the number of labels we're giving children, in my view, we have to bring in more reading specialists, and and or or, and this is a really nice solution, make our special education teachers reading specialists as well. We had a 45 credit master's where I taught at Donnelly College for a long time, 45 credits, and 21 in special ed and 24 in reading. And we were turning out special ed teachers who really were reading specialists also. Well, what happened to that? It became the most highly enrolled program at the college. And 2 and 3, 4 years, it was just doing a marvelous job of helping people get three certifications: special ed certification, reading certification, and elementary certification. Uh, for some reason, New York State changed the licensing credentials, and that
Yeah.
program didn't make the cut or whatever. Who knows? It wasn't in compliance with what they wanted. It was a wonderful program. So we have to stop labeling children, as you said. Once a youngster thinks there's something wrong with them, there is something wrong with them. That, and if I may, last thing. Uh, that I'll just mention on this. The Matthew effect in reading, from the book of Matthew, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Well, it's the same thing with reading. The youngsters who are good readers, they like to read. Because they like to read, they do more reading. Because they do more reading, they get better at it. Because they get better at it, they like it more. But just the opposite is the case with
Yeah.
poor, because they can't read, because they have severe difficulty decoding. They don't want to read. Because they don't want to read, they don't read. Because they don't read, they get even poorer at it. So that's a problem. It's called the Matthew effect in reading, and we have to mitigate that problem. And how do we mitigate that problem? By catching it early on and not throwing a label on them, and surely not giving them an IEP that says you don't have to read anymore. No one ever got good at reading by not reading. So again, we have to really start looking carefully at the training of special ed teachers, and I'm all in favor of having special ed faculty. Let's just make sure that they have adequate background in reading. If they don't have more than, I don't know. It's hard to reduce it to credits, because teachers do a lot of other things. They do reading on their own. Obviously, they have professional development, so I'm not going to reduce it to a number of credits. But they have to be, they have to have expertise in reading if they're going to help these children who again, if you remember correctly, maybe 5, 8, 10 years ago, there was something called the essential auditory processing difficulty, which was that was the I call it the label du jour. And I would ask people, what exactly is a central auditory processing difficulty? And my students, who are all teachers, would say, "Oh, come on, Cavuto, you know." "No, I don't know. What's difficulty processing?" I said, "Well, that's a circumlocution. You just define the term with the term." "Well, no, come on, you know, he can't process auditorily." "Oh, you mean he can't hear sound?" Well, yeah, uh, friend, if we can't define something, by the way, that's fine. All of a sudden, that disability disappeared. That label became uh, so overly overused and undefinable. We have to be, I think, as you started the talk saying, quite correctly, once we label a youngster, that youngster feels there's something wrong with them. When he feels there's something wrong with them, there is something wrong with them. So what? How do we fix that? We
We have about
significantly reduce the labels.
we have about 10 minutes for the next topics because
Okay.
we entered about a whole bunch of them. But before I forget, on Tuesday, Dennis Palumbo, psychoanalyst, psychotherapist Dennis Palumbo, will be here to talk about synthesis, how people deal with being upset, how people deal with being failure, and being told that they're not good enough. Plus,
Ah,
we're going to talk about his book Panic Attack that just came out on audio on the 21st. The author of Killing Breath. That should be interesting. And on the 29th, this is going to be hysterical. Mike Cameron's going to be here. He's going to talk about what happens when your friend and you pay 50 cents for a lottery ticket. He wins it and tells you you're not entitled to the 40 million. Watch what he does to get it. I mean, what can I say?
yeah.
I have April is gone. May I have a few spots, and June, and then I have to decide whether I really want to keep doing this or not. So reading improves how, in other words, instruction versus explanation, and reading improves how do you tell a child, how do you get kids to want to read more? But that's beside the point. Effective domain we talked about. What effective assessment looks like, that's number 8. What
Yes.
must a multiple component reader? Can they read accurately? Do they understand? How do you really give an assessment that is going to help you understand whether the child knows what they're doing? And the final one is number. How do you know that reading improves?
Yeah. Well, to answer your question, in my view, and this will sound somewhat self-serving, but I wrote 2 books. However, at this point, they're probably you could get them in the those boutique stores online that sell books that are more than 20 years old. But both of them had to do with exactly your question. I developed a reading model called the structured reading assessment model. Maybe I call it simple reading assessment model. That someone say, "Well, you should change it to structure." Okay, whatever. But it was looked like a Venn diagram, Fran. And you had
Yeah,
decoding automaticity, then you had background knowledge, then you had receptive vocabulary, and right smack in the middle, you had reading comprehension. And each one of those areas must be assessed. And I'm not talking about with a number 2 pencil test, because that tells you nothing except he's reading 2.5, which statistically is ridiculous. Fifth month of second grade, oh, give me a break. But if one does a individualized assessment, you can tell without much difficulty what level is the youngster. That's why I would start. In fact, you have to start with decoding. What level is his decoding? Well, okay, the decoding comes out to about mid second grade level. I like those general levels more so than the ridiculous ones that we can pinpoint 2.8, 2.9. No, no. So his decoding is about mid second grade level. Okay. Um, and he's in 4th grade. So, by the way, that takes 15 minutes. You've already figured out the major problem is he's very poor at getting uh, a 4th grade youngster is trying to read a science book, a social studies book, written 1 year above, because they're always written 1 year above because of the technical vocabulary. So we got a youngster who can decode at the second grade level, and he's trying to figure out text written at the 5th grade level. That's just not going to happen. So now he's okay. Let me do the rest of the testing. Then you're going to test his comprehension. Okay. Are you going to start with a whatever grade? If I said it was in third grade or whatever. You're going to start with the fourth grade? No, of course not, because his decoding is only mid-second. So now you test his comprehension, and you give him a second grade passage, and he ends up passing that, but it takes him a long time to read. His rate is low. Well, how come? Because he doesn't have what's called decoding automaticity.
Mm.
Okay, so we got to increase his automaticity. Then you check his background knowledge. Um, and you could give an IQ test, but I really like the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test. That's also a test of receptive vocab. And it's an easel, and you turn pages and you say telescope, and he has to look and point to the word uh, uh, apartment, engine, and each one he has to point to the correct word. What's nice about that is it's decoding free. So now you're able to figure, now you're able to find out really how much vocabulary and schemata does this youngster have. And let's just say he comes out fourth, fifth grade level on those tests. Ah, uh, wow. All of a sudden, I'm smiling as the person doing the assessment. I'm smiling broadly because now I know this youngster has remarkable potential. Why? Because reading is a thinking process, and you have to have good background, good schemata, and good vocabulary. So this youngster has those. So the biggest problem for this youngster that I just described is in the act of decoding. So we have to fix that. That eh, I don't want to use a medical term like prognosis, but the the potential for that youngster is very good, very good. Why? Because he's got that background knowledge, he's got that vocab. Conversely, a youngster, his sister Jill, same problems I just described, except her background knowledge, her vocabulary are not good. They're poor. Well, that's the youngster who's going to be
Mm.
really, really struggling until we fix those. And you know what? We can't fix those just in school, Fran. We need parents' help with that. Uh, Shirley Bryce Heath said, "Reading is not a reading is not a school phenomenon. It's a
Yeah.
cultural phenomenon." Everybody has to play a part. So we have to let that parent know the things that they have to do at home to help Jill bring up those areas. So when
Exactly.
I, I'm trying to simplify a 200 word book into a few minutes, but that kind of assessment tells me as exact as you can where the problems are and what can be done about them. The good news about that, Fran, is that all of a sudden, even when I go through this with parents, and I let them fill out the model with a plus and a minus in the different areas. Even when there are minuses, the parents are happy because someone is identifying a specific area and letting them know we can fix this. Not just we, meaning my office or my faculty, but we, meaning with the parents, helping and what they have to do. Instead of a quasi medical, more than a little ambiguous label, you're giving something specific. And more importantly, you're letting parents know this can be fixed. And parents find that incredibly liberating. And I don't think it's even debatable. Is that better than labeling? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. In
All
fact,
I know is that when I gave her the 10 novels, my niece, my little cousin,
yeah.
she she's. I mean, I was outside because whatever reason I couldn't stay. Her mother called me later. She said, "Well, Henry Rose would rather read a book than watch television." And I mean, I'm the same way. And I got very upset this week because the post office hasn't brought anything. And I read 5 books last week. And I have one that's 700 pages, but it's not due out till June. I have it halfway done. And I have 20 books on the side here, and I have to interview these people. And I read all of them. There are times that I'll turn down a novel. There are times that I will turn down a book if it has poor language or is a topic that I don't want to talk about. But the latest novels are about Iran and Iraq. And it seems that they wrote them a while ago, but if you listen to the news, the book is more accurate than the news.
Oh, no
But the
doubt,
most the
no
most
doubt about
important
it.
thing is kids have to know that it's okay to read and you don't have to be perfect. and you could sit and read quietly by yourself and just whatever. So there's instructional verses, explanation, chunk information, active engagement, model and demonstrate, direct instruction, systematic instruction, explicit instruction, and I can tell you now, teachers don't do that.
Yeah,
That is the problem, and so many of them are stuck on this. I know I listened to it, science of reading, and I try to explain to my niece Grace Marie could read. You don't need to sit there and go.
right, right.
Let her do it, and Gracie does it the way I do it. So
Yeah,
closing insight:
Fred, if I may
reading
just make this
improves
one
to
statement.
engagement. The reader is engaged, but what happens? I mean, when they, my mother would never pick my books. I wouldn't even let her.
Yeah,
I would say to her, she would say, I read it, Ma. Don't worry about it. I'm great." My sister would say, "Did you read it so you could write my book report?" I go, "No, you're going to read it yourself."
yeah,
It's the hardest thing in the world when somebody picks the books that you have to read and you hate them.
exactly.
And that turns out kids have to be able to pick what they want. I know
Right.
the school picks the a whole bunch of stuff. And like I said before, I got in trouble for doing To Kill a Mockingbird with the sixth grade. It was worth every minute of it. It
Yeah,
was worth it. But you know what? They asked to read it, and I think it's great. I got reminded of that when I saw my student 2 weeks ago when I went to visit him in his office. He said, "Do you remember what you did?" I said, "I'm still doing it." But you
you
know
know,
what? Children should be able to read what they want.
yeah,
I
and
mean, besides the books for school, children should be able to read what they want, and it doesn't really matter. I can imagine a parent says, "Well, what are you reading?"
yeah,
Making sure that it's appropriate. It doesn't have, the language that you don't want.
right,
But what difference does it make if they reads about sports or hockey or music or anything? What difference does it make?
yeah,
Like I said, my fifth grade reading groups was hilarious. Monday was phonics and word recognition, but in a very unusual way. Comprehension on Wednesday, but on Friday, went the third day, I would say, "What do you want to read?" And then, of course, it put me to the test. I learned about boxes and wrestlers and music and you name it, I learned it. And they said, "Why did you do this?" I said, "Because I want you to come in here and not look at me and say, 'Oh God, I have to be here.'"
right,
I don't
right.
think in the 19 years I taught reading that any child ever did that. As a matter of fact, like I said before, two of the teachers suspended them from reading, and the kids left the room and came down anyway
Yeah.
because they didn't care. So this has been fun. What would you say to parents? And what would you say to teachers that would encourage kids to read it? It's okay to make a mistake. So what?
Uh, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
it, Uh, I'm not sure there's a general statement I can make across the board. However, even with choosing books,
Yeah.
there's no argument. Children
Yeah.
should be allowed to choose any book they'd like to read. However, sometimes I saw this a lot at the secondary level. Youngsters would choose books that they just couldn't read, but it
Yeah.
made them feel good carrying that book around, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. But uh, you know, let me just say this. I think possibly a really important thing for your viewers to take from our session today is that it's never, in my view, it's never a reading program. Reading programs, as you know, they come and go. We have the science of reading. We have whole language. We have half language,
Hmm.
quarter language. And I'm being facetious. We have Gordon Gillingham. We have Wilson. Programs come and go. It all boils down, in my view, Fran, to the teacher's knowledge base about
Yeah.
reading. This is critically important. And how do they develop a really strong knowledge base? I have 3 degrees. I have a bachelor's in English, a master's in reading, and a PhD in reading slash psycholinguistics. And I've tested and worked with thousands of children. That's how I got the what I call the knowing eye and the knowing ear. So we really, really have to stop doing this. Oh, I like this program. I like that program. They call it the reading wars in this country. Ridiculous. Let's make the teachers more. Let's increase their expertise in terms of how reading works. Let's make them feel really adequate in teaching reading. Let's, if we can, if the youngster's in second grade and he's a non-reader, first thing we're going to do is we're going to send him to special ed or an IEP. But you know what? That there's only one other alternative, but I this is a viable alternative. Give that youngster one-to-one instruction with a reading specialist. Is that going to cost the school a lot of money? Sure it is, but so does special education. Okay, and if you have a youngster in second grade who is almost a non-reader, a primer, pre-primer reader, and he's the big problem is basically he
Yeah.
can't code. He needs one-to-one instruction, not by the college student next door who does tutoring on the side. He needs extra, or she needs expert instruction by someone who really knows reading as process. And in my view, take that second grader. I know what I'm going to do if I'm assigned to work with that youngster. I'm going to do language experience. Language experiences, the youngster's going to tell me about something that he did over the weekend. After he tells me about it, I'm going to whip out a blank book. It's a book, a hardcover book with nothing in it. I'm going to say, "Let's write your story," and I'm going to write what I said. I'm going to write exactly what you told me, exactly, but I'm going to write as much as I can. What you told me. You went to your friend's house. Your weekend, Joey's weekend. You went swimming. You went in your neighbor's house. They had a big in-ground pool. You had lots of fun. You came home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and your mother said, "You must have had a great time." I would write that in a book. Then I'm going to say, "Joey, you're going to read that." And he's going to look at
We're
me.
officially over the limit.
I'm sorry.
When do you want to do this again? Because we're officially over the limit. I don't care. They won't kill me.
Yes,
Restream monitors everything I do, and then they
I,
rate it afterwards.
yes. I'm sorry for going over.
Where
Um,
do you? It's okay. Do you want to do June or August?
Probably June would be better.
June. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me see what I've got. I have something on the second, and I have something on the 22nd. Was it the 20? Oh, when was my month? I have something on the second, 22nd. Do you want to do the end of June or the middle of June?
Um,
I could do
I,
the
I know,
29th or the 30th.
probably the beginning of June because I have two grandchildren graduating high school this year, so I'll be.
I have something on that day. I could do the 11th.
That sounds fine.
The, it's a Thursday.
That sounds fine.
Okay, let me put that in there so I know.
And we'll come up with something that complements today's topics. How's that sound?
Okay, let me end the stream like a good girl.